Welcome to Blogging Heads. I'm Jeremy Scahill, the national security correspondent for The Nation magazine and author of the book Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. And I'm speaking today with our friend and colleague in Karachi.
Hi, I'm Saba Imtiaz. I work as a reporter for the Express Tribune newspaper in Pakistan, and I'm based in Karachi, and which is, obviously really heating up with the Raymond Davis case right now.
Right, and so today Saba and I are going to be discussing the very curious case of this, some say CIA contractor, some say military contractor, Raymond Davis, and we're going to try to sort of peel back the layers of the onion of this case, and also talk about its implications for future relations between the U.S. and Pakistan, and also what it means about the covert U.S. war that really has been going on in Pakistan for a number of years. So, Saba, maybe you can talk about how we got to where we are, where Ray Davis was released from a Pakistani prison and flew to Kabul, Afghanistan.
Great. So, basically, very calm evening in Lahore. There were reports that came out on news channels that said that a foreigner had been found sort of shooting two men in broad daylight. Now, this is a very odd thing to happen. I mean, foreigner could mean anything in Pakistan, right? But I think the minute the news came out, everyone sort of suspected that, oh no, this is going to be an American. And I think it just goes on to show how sort of widespread, this fear of contractors and spies and, sort of mercenaries roaming around Pakistan is. But obviously, I mean, that is what really happened, that, the police instantly said, oh, yes, there was an American. He was involved in a shooting incident, with two men. The initial reports that came out said that he had shot them in self-defense because they were robbers. And it's very common in Pakistan to have, two men following you and ask you for your money or for your cell phone. These crimes are very regular in Karachi, for example, not as often in Lahore. But what the interesting thing about this case was that the minute this shooting in self-defense case happened, another car came on the scene and drove over another man. And that car was also actually a U.S. consulate car, but the car sort of sped away. Nobody till this date knows who was in the car, who was driving the car. Was it a U.S. consulate employee? Were they there to help Raymond Davis, and so on and so forth. But basically, this case then exploded from there on. The Lahore police took this man who they said his name was Raymond Davis, into custody. Interestingly, the State Department then said that the name of the man out there was incorrect. So that was another interesting angle to this case. And from then it sort of just really exploded, because an American caught in broad daylight shooting two men became an issue of national interest, of national security, and it fueled anti-American sentiment in the country, which is already pretty rampant and has been for decades now. It just became the biggest case of all time. And then add to that the issue of diplomatic immunity. There were lots of things that happened to this. And so there were two different cases filed against Raymond Davis in Pakistani courts. One was the case of murder of two men. The other case that was in another court was of the question of diplomatic immunity. And so basically, in the middle of this government wrangling, the intelligence agencies getting involved, etc., this case had been dragging on for many weeks now. And then yesterday, lo and behold, after he was indicted in a court in the morning, in the evening, news came out that Raymond Davis is on a plane to Bagram, and he has sort of gotten his way out of this case by paying blood money, which is a law that was inserted into the constitution to make it compliant with the Shariah. And it was, I believe, inserted in 1990. And basically, blood money is how you can settle a case. It's sort of a pardon, and it's a compromise between the accused and the victim. And since then, I mean, there are some protests that have happened in Pakistan, but basically that is the case, the very infamous case of Raymond Davis.
Right. And, Saba, one of the things that I think is really curious, I spend a lot of time talking to people in the intelligence community in the United States and in the military community. I've done a lot of reporting about the CIA programs, the drone bombing program in Pakistan, as well as a parallel campaign to target or assassinate people that the United States determines to be high-value targets or terrorist threats. And, of course, this drone bombing has gone on forever. But what's really interesting about all of that in the context of Ray Davis is that Ray Davis years ago was working in Pakistan for Blackwater, the notorious mercenary company, which has now been renamed Z Services. And he was working for Blackwater at a time when that company was at the center of this sort of CIA Joint Special Operations Command covert war. And then for him to pop up in this incident was quite incredible. I mean, all the reports say that he was a CIA contractor, I'm not certain of that. He very well may be a CIA contractor. He also might be a Joint Special Operations Command operative or a contractor for them. And if that's the case, that could indicate why Pakistan was so pissed off about this because, as you know, Saba, there's been a lot of tension between the Pakistani government and the American government over this issue of covert actions that are taken without the knowledge of the Pakistani government. So if Ray Davis was either targeting the militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba or doing some surveillance on them or trying to liaise with a member of Lashkar-e-Taiba, which many believe to basically just be a front organization for the ISI, that would explain how he got himself into a situation where he was sort of on the run from these two men. Now, neither you nor I, Saba, know exactly what happened or who any of these people actually are, but it does seem like Ray Davis had his hand in a honeypot that the Pakistani government did not want his hand in.
Completely. And it became an issue of a turf war, really. The fact that an American spy, contractor, whatever, he was, we really don't know at this point. But the fact that this man was caught in Lahore, one of Pakistan's largest cities, shooting two men in self-defense, two men who allegedly were operators of Pakistan's own intelligence agency. Now, this is also not confirmed because some intelligence officials have confirmed this and some have said no. So it really did become a matter of, how can everyone knows. It's an open secret. Everyone knows that there are, contractors operating in Pakistan. Everyone knows the CIA is based here. I mean, there was a CIA station. The CIA station had to flee the country after his name was published in a lawsuit. So, I mean, everyone knows all of this. But the fact that this happened in broad daylight, the question really arose that what kind of blanket immunity do these operators have? And there are no real laws or any sort of, rules and regulations that are governing their use. The Pakistani government has often denied their presence in Pakistan even, but it's become an open secret, really. I mean, you go to a city like Peshawar and somebody will point out to you, this is the Blackwater house, this is the operative, this is what they do, this is the NGO they work with as a cover. So it's a really, really messed up issue here.
Right. And I mean, the word Blackwater has almost become kind of like the word Kleenex to describe any kind of tissue. Blackwater now, DynCorp is Blackwater, Triple Canopy is Blackwater. Any armed security that are Americans now have become Blackwater. Having said that, Blackwater definitely has a lengthy track record inside of Pakistan. In fact, in 2006, Blackwater operatives were a part of a mission called that in U.S. military terms they call hot pursuit, where U.S. Special Operations Forces cross over from Afghanistan into Pakistan to try to target suspected members of Al-Qaeda or various leaders of the various Taliban factions. And Blackwater was known to have been involved with those kinds of operations. But what's really interesting, I think, when we talk about contractors in Pakistan, is the issue of diplomatic immunity for those armed individuals. The U.S. government said from the beginning that Ray Davis was a diplomat. Then it turned into he was a CIA operative. And that's a very complicated legal territory that you're walking into. But in general, the policy of the United States government in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and elsewhere is that their armed security guards, some would say mercenaries, have diplomatic immunity. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, they've operated with impunity and shot civilians. But those are two areas where the world knows there's a war. In Pakistan, a country that is governed by a government that the U.S. calls a friend, to have a private contractor kill two operatives, intelligence operatives of Pakistan is incredible. If you flip it around and imagine how Americans would react if two FBI agents or CIA agents were gunned down by a Pakistani spy in Washington, D.C. or in New York, I can almost guarantee you, Saba, that individual would not be allowed to go back to Pakistan. This would be a very, very big deal. So it's the double standard, but it all boils down to the United States has one set of rules for itself and another set of rules for the rest of the world. And we see that in the Ray Davis case.
And that's exactly why people were protesting here. I mean, you strip away the hysteria side of it that, religious political parties whipped up here and said that, this is a matter of national security and, this is a matter of our pride and how can he do this in our land? I mean, that's not really the case. People are gunned down here every single day and probably as we speak right now. So it's not a question of murder. It's a question of really how is this happening here? And the other really, really big, sort of issue here is that Pakistanis have complained again and again about the kind of work that the Americans are doing here. I mean, the fact that there are spies here puts every single NGO worker here at risk. a sort of witch hunt has been kind of launched in Pakistan in the past few weeks, if you've been following the news. All these random foreigners have been picked up from places saying, oh, you've overstayed on your visa, the security contractor was picked up in Peshawar, your visa, your extension was not approved. So this will put a lot of innocent lives into risk and people who may be actually doing good work here. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems in this case. And obviously the question of justice, right? Now, you kill two people, you whip up this issue in the press as well as, on the streets. The widow commits suicide of one of the men who has been killed. There is a very clear need for justice here, and that's exactly what people were asking. Now, I think, at least from the Pakistani perspective, what I think was really interesting about this case is how the question of diplomatic immunity came up. Now, if from day one, the US had been clear with Pakistan and, the Pakistani media and said, oh, he has diplomatic immunity, leave him alone. Or, sort of settle this case properly. And there's also a reported case that the US also apparently settled a similar case of a driver, running down a man in Islamabad last year, I believe, and settled the case using blood money as well. But there's no record of that case. It's only been reported in one newspaper.
And it got almost no attention at the time. It was handled in a very different way. And I think there may have been alcohol involved with that incident. I think the American had been drinking or something. But you're right. I mean, it's interesting because that case went away, was not even a blip on the world's radar. Right,
exactly. So, I mean, that's the thing of how it was treated. And here you have to really, applaud, in one way, the what we call in Pakistan, the establishment, as well, the intelligence community, the old government bureaucrats who really believe that this is an issue about how Pakistan can assert its sovereignty for once and for all. It became let's finally turn the tables on the US. For years, they've been pressurizing us to say, launch an operation in North Waziristan, crack down on terrorist havens, do this, do that, say yes to drone strikes, all of this. And so finally, I think Pakistani establishment realized that, oh, great, we have a live CIA spy in our midst.
Right.
Let's put him in the highest, in one of the most notorious jails in the city, Kot Lakhpat, which is, by the way, not an easy jail to be in. This is not no ordinary jail. This is a place which is held, for example, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Zulfikar Bhutto, who was then executed. Right. This is no ordinary jail, and it's no ordinary circumstances that you would put somebody in there. So they thought, let's have we have a CIA spy in our midst. Let's do whatever we can. So obviously, it was, a lot of it seemed very orchestrated. The sort of massive protests in Pakistan. Yes, people are angry about justice and murder and about the US doing this on Pakistani soil, but there's also a question of how is this whipped off so quickly.
Right.
And there's one very interesting thing in this is that these families of the two victims in this case, they received a lot of support in terms of hysteria and and protests and religious and political parties who basically camped out at their house saying, please do not accept compensation. But they didn't offer a single cent of money to them.
Right. I mean, the other thing here that I find really fascinating is that it almost seemed as though the Pakistanis and the Americans were when I talk about them, I mean the government, not our people. But these two governments were playing a very high stakes chess game with the Raymond Davis case being the board that it played out on, because clearly the Pakistani government, the ISI, and also some elements of the military realized that they really had the Americans where they wanted them with Ray Davis, and that they could extract something. In fact, one embassy official in Islamabad told Fox News, the right-wing fake news network in America, told Fox News that the Pakistanis were trying to torture us to get as much as they could before they released Ray Davis. And that story came out the night before Davis was released. The other thing that was interesting is that when the U.S. Embassy released its press release from the ambassador in Pakistan, the U.S. ambassador in Pakistan, it was dated March 10th. And of course, Ray Davis was released on March 16th. Whether it was a typo by some tired embassy worker or they had this in the works for a while, it's very clear that a lot went on. And one thing I wanted to, you and I emailed a bit about this, but it seems like there was this sort of secret negotiation involving Hussein Haqqani, the Pakistani ambassador to the United States, and Senator John Kerry, who some believe could be the next Secretary of State in the United States, to kind of cook up this plot to use Sharia law to free Ray Davis, which is incredibly ironic given this ridiculous hysteria in the United States about creeping Sharia law and the dangers of Sharia law, and how the United States has used it to free one of their own spies. So maybe you could talk, Saba, about sort of how that has played out, this issue of Sharia law, because I think a lot of people have no clue how Sharia law interfaces with civil law in Pakistan and how it related to this case.
Well, the creeping Sharia point you bring up is very interesting. And I just wanted to add that I think this was, again, it's one of those evil genius moves, right? All these religious parties who had been protesting for Raymond Davis to be executed and for justice to be served are pretty much, bamboozled by this, and I don't know a better term to use, because now religion has been used against them in the very exact way that they used religion as a mean of gaining more political power. And so it's very ironic that on one way they say that, oh, the blasphemy law is correct because it's in some form of Sharia that they believe in, but this is not about Sharia, this is about justice. But just in terms of the Sharia thing, now basically the Constitution of Pakistan during General Zia-ul-Haq's regime was made compliant with the Sharia. So, for example, with Islamic jurisprudence, and sort of as moves to sort of bring it in line with this, all these new laws were inserted, over a certain period of time. Which includes stronger punishments for blasphemy, for people who have committed blasphemy. There were, the infamous Hudud ordinances about the punishment that were given to rapists, etc., etc. But the Qisas and Death law was basically, which is Qisas is and punishment and pardon law, so to speak, and compensation law, really. So this was inserted in 1990 during, I believe, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's regime. Basically what this law says is that you can either ask for punishment for the person who is accused in the case, or you can pardon him. You have to give a certain amount of blood money or land as compensation to the victims of the heirs of the legal heirs of the victims. Now, what is interesting in this case is that the minimum amount for blood money is not that high. A lot of cases are solved by using this blood money concept, and it's often fairly criticized in Pakistan because a lot of influential people use this law to get away with murder. And so the fact that the Americans have done the exact same thing is, the irony is really not lost on anyone. But the fact that 200 million rupees, which is a huge, huge amount in Pakistan, has been given to them, by who, nobody knows, because the government of Pakistan is staying very silent on the issue. Hillary said yesterday that the US did not give any money, so exactly where did the money come from is anyone's guess.
Wait, hold on 1 second though. That's a really funny point. And just so for the viewers that are watching this in the United States, each family got somewhere in the ballpark, reportedly, of about $700,000 US dollars, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right. And Hillary Clinton said that the U.S. didn't pay it, but now we're seeing these reports that actually the Pakistani government paid it, and the U.S. is going to pay them back later. So it's really theater of the absurd here, with the U.S. Secretary of State saying we didn't pay anything because Pakistan paid it, and we're going to pay them back later.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, one interesting point is this the precedent now for a CI's employer or contractor committing murder in broad daylight and getting caught? The getting caught angle is very important because this person got caught. He did it in the most stupid way ever. Really, in terms of spy tactics, every intelligence official has said, "What the hell was he thinking?" You just don't go around shooting men in daylight in Pakistan. But is this a precedent that has been set? Is $700,000 per family the price that you can pay to get away with murder in this country? And so this rhetoric that has now come out about how this will help for CIA-ISI relations. I really don't, because I think the CIA has now learned that, okay, this is how we're supposed to do it. We've learned how to solve our PR mistakes and how to work with the embassies, etc. This is a pretty, it's a pretty good game plan. And, in terms of, look at the presence of intelligence officials, the intelligence operators in Pakistan, both on the Pakistani and the American side. It doesn't seem to be decreasing.
Oh, no.
Not at all. And so I don't really think that has anything to do with it. But in terms of Sharia, yes, it's an interesting game plan that they've now already set out. This is a way that we can easily, and the best part of the whole thing is really that this was done according to the Constitution of Pakistan. So nobody can actually say that this was illegal. The questions of diplomatic immunity aside, whether the case should even have gone into court is one other thing altogether. And that's something that nobody will really know the answer to now. But the fact that they did this in court legally with the legal heirs all present, with the judge, asking everyone, etc., is legal. Now, one of the other big questions is that how did this all happen overnight, or literally not even overnight in one day? And that's where the question that you said about Kerry and Hussain Haqqani, these negotiations have apparently been going on for 3 weeks, if not more. The question of blood money was brought up after John Kerry's visit to Pakistan. Senator Kerry played a very sort of strategic role when he came here. He met with every single Pakistani, high-level official. He met with the former foreign minister, who had decided to say that after he was not given a position in the cabinet, he decided to start saying that, Raymond Davis doesn't have diplomatic immunity. And he was trying to win points with the public. And there's a rumor that, he was being propped up by, again, the intelligence and the military to say all of this and sort of play into the hysteria of the Raymond Davis case. And so when Senator Kerry came here, he spoke about how, there is forgiveness in Islam, etc., etc. And it was a very well-timed and well-played out strategy. And so the question of blood money came up before as well. There's also the interesting angle which some family members of one of the victims said that they would like to exchange Afia Siddiqui, who is serving a jail sentence of 86 years in America for allegedly trying to shoot a U.S. official in Afghanistan. They said that, can we exchange Afia with Raymond Davis? All this, yes. I mean, the thing is, but this was a very valid theory being, played around in the Pakistani media, and as I believe in some official circles as well, because there was a lot of talk about this before. So, the question of Shariah and the blood money and all of this is one thing. I think it's, they found a good legal loophole out of it, and the religious parties have exploited Islam for many years, and I think it's, the government decided to do the exact. Sorry. What?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah, finish your point.
The government decided to do the exact same thing. The government decided to do the exact same thing to them. Is that use a religious law and ensure that, if you believe in Sharia, so do the Americans at this point.
Right. And the thing is that the U.S. private contractors, mercenaries, private security, whatever you want to call them, have a long track record going back to the launch of the so-called war on terror in Afghanistan and in Iraq. I mean, there have just been scores and scores of civilians that have been killed by these private contractors. And in the case of Iraq, the most famous incident was this Nicer Square massacre that happened in Baghdad in September of 2007, when Blackwater operatives opened fire on a very crowded intersection in Baghdad in the middle of the day and ended up killing 17 people, including a 9-year-old boy. And I've actually met that 9-year-old boy. His name was Ali Kanani, and his father, Mohammed Kanani, is the only Iraqi with a case left against Blackwater in the United States because he wouldn't settle for the blood money. Blackwater tried to pay him $20,000, and he said, "You can't put a price on the life of my son." And he said, "I'll pay you all the money I ever make in my lifetime if you bring my son back." And I think that no matter how high the price they pay, $700,000, $20,000, some people in Iraq have gotten $5,000. The issue here is it is blood money, and not just in the sense of Sharia law, but in the sense that you're capping a price for someone's life. And I think this is going to have serious blowback for the United States and for the Pakistani government down the line, because of the message it sends that these guys can literally get away with murder if they have enough cash to pay their way out of jail. And the other point that I would make, Saba, about this is that, I've talked to a number of people in the special operations community in the United States, people that, like Ray Davis, find themselves in very dangerous situations, and they're armed, and they have people that do want to kill them. And, sort of talking to them, and the reality is that from a U.S. perspective, it was the only move that Washington had. They had to get Ray Davis out of there, because if they didn't, that means that they would send a message to their operators in the field, these guys that are working clandestinely in countries around the world, that if you get in trouble, you're pretty much on your own. So from an American perspective, there's a lot of praise being heaped on the Obama administration for how they handled this, because the fact is they got their guy out. For the Pakistani government, long term, there would have been no benefit to keeping Raymond Davis for this current Pakistani government. But in the short term, I guarantee you they extracted something from the Americans. There's no doubt about it. The New York Times reported on Thursday that Pakistan had gotten an agreement from the CIA to scale back, was the phrase they used, its covert operations being done without the ISI's knowledge. And then the day after Ray Davis is released, there's a massive drone bombing campaign, that kills 40 people. So that's the CIA definition of scaled back, I guess.
Well, clearly, the Pakistanis did get something out of it. And that's what I said. They found a real life CIA spy in their midst, and they said, why not, put him in jail, in a high security jail? Why not, present him in court? And they did a lot of really crazy things in the middle as well. There were times when I believe they presented him in court and then informed their embassy that they had a trial, a hearing set. So they really made them run around a little bit. And the interesting thing is that the Punjab police, the provincial police that was dealing with this case, was trying actually to get justice. So it was ironic. They were trying to get the third person involved in this case, which was the driver of the car that ran over the third individual, who I also here today has been paid that money as well. But that case has not been properly.
And the guy. The people who were driving that car that killed the other Pakistani, and that person was just a civilian, is my understanding. The one that was killed wasn't an ISI person.
No,
is that right?
That's again the theory that he was a civilian, and basically that car came to Raymond Davis's aid and then knocked this person over.
Right.
So I believe that person was not an intelligence spy either. But the question is that I just really lost my point. Sorry.
Well, they were the people in that car that ran that person over. They never were arrested. They were taken immediately out of, or they were taken out of the country.
They were taken out of the country, and my point was that the Punjab police was basically asking the federal government, can you please ask the U.S. consulate to hand over the driver to us? We would like to try him. We would like to charge him with the crime that he has committed. Right. And, there were even cases where they apparently parked outside the U.S. consulate for hours, hoping that somebody would come out to answer the police. So, this also sends a very bad example to law enforcement agencies as well. See, law enforcement agencies are basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. They will catch an XYZ person, but then what do you do if, you get a call from above, as they call it in Pakistan, and say, please set this person free, or, please stop harassing the consulate, or please stop doing this. It sets a bad example for the law enforcement agencies as well. Now, if you want to tell the law enforcement agencies that, this person has diplomatic immunity, and, you should not be presenting a case against him in court, and, this, because according to the Vienna Convention, you can't try a person in court if the person has diplomatic immunity. That's another thing altogether. But if you're not giving them that message, and you're telling them not to go ahead and pursue the case either, then where are you leaving them, really? And then what hope does any Pakistani have to get justice in this country? That's a really important message that this sends, that you can basically, anyway, regardless of who kills you, you get compensated for it or you won't.
Right. I mean, the real issue here, I think that is important to focus on also, is that this case really highlights the extent to which the U.S. is engaged in this undeclared covert war in Pakistan, from Karachi to Peshawar to Islamabad to the frontier provinces. I mean, it's very clear that the American and Pakistani people don't even know 1% of what's going on when it comes to this covert war. Who knows what Ray Davis was doing? I've seen commentary from veterans of the clandestine operations world in the United States saying that they believe that from Ray Davis's profile, he may have been heading up what's called the Special Missions Unit inside of Pakistan, which would be a highly classified, highly compartmentalized operation that could have as its end result some kind of what they call a direct action or a targeted kill operation. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to know exactly what Ray Davis was doing, what his job is. And I think that the New York Times is often used by the U.S. intelligence and military community as a convenient playground to provide leaks that are aimed at discrediting one or the other. So it's in the CIA's interest at times to make the U.S. military look bad when it comes to these covert actions, and it's in the military's interest to make the CIA look bad at times. So, who's actually telling the truth, we don't know, but just because it's in the New York Times doesn't make it so. I'm not convinced 100% that Ray Davis actually was CIA. He very well may have been something else that would have been far more inflammatory to the situation between Pakistan and the United States. And it could be that we've been provided with a story that is bad and just bad enough to be sensational, but is also going to help mask something that's much darker. I don't know. It's just a theory, but I do think that we're never going to get to the bottom of this in its entirety.
Well, Jeremy, you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, how much can you trust the story that we've been given? Now, remember the CIA story as well. The fact that he was a CIA operative came out at almost a month after he had been, after this case had first come out into the limelight. For weeks, everyone was saying, no, he's a technical administrative officer. He has nothing to do with spy operations. He works as a consultant here. He's a regional affairs officer, which, in Pakistan, everyone sort of said that means CIA. But, the question is that, no, the fact that it took almost a month for the story to even emerge that he was a CIA employee. I mean, really, it shows the extent of how much anyone is willing to lie to you at any point. And again, it brings up, the issue of transparency on one hand. When I said earlier about the ISI-CIA turf war, that's also one issue because if, the ISI, somebody said to, former military official said to me the other day, he's like, the ISI would be really stupid if they didn't know that there were these 5 Americans living in a house in Lahore and they were, gathering intelligence on the Lashkar-e-Taiba, whatever it was they were doing. So the ISI knew that this was going on. I think that one of the reasons they're so mad, this is only my personal view on this, is that the reason they're so mad is that they didn't realize the full extent of what they were doing in Lahore, or in Punjab or whichever. And obviously you do realize that the Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, if he was collecting intelligence on them, has long been accused of being backed by the military and the intelligence. So if, the Lashkar-e-Taiba has their charity wing, which is called the Jamaat-ul-Dawa, which is banned by the United Nations, is openly sort of allowed to fundraise in Pakistan. They're allowed into all sorts of conflict zones. They've helped out the internally displaced people from fighting in Swat as well as in and other regions have also helped out with the flood fundraising and relief efforts. So these organizations, and they're allowed to fundraise, and they're allowed to work and do whatever they want. So the fact that if this was the Lashkar-e-Taiba intelligence that he was collecting, the military intelligence could have easily said, oh my God, they're going to find out that we're involved to XYZ extent. But this is again, this is really, you can at this point imagine any extent of activities that he could be doing. There's one theory that he was collecting information on targets for drone strikes. And that was, why apparently drone strikes had stopped for a certain period of time after his arrest. So, there's all sorts of theories of what exactly he was doing here. But you're right, completely. We cannot really trust the story that has been fed to us. Again, you don't even know whether the blood money has actually even been given to the heirs of the victims. 100 million rupees per family or $700,000 per family. Are we expecting that the government and any intelligence agency do not take a cut in this? And how do you roam around with that kind of money? Those families have disappeared. But there's a rumor that they're in the States already. There's another rumor that they're sitting in some safe house in Islamabad, waiting to be spirited out of the country. So, who did the money go to? Who gave it? What kind of story has been fed to us? This is all really something that we'll never know.
Right. And I also think, as we're sort of nearing the end of our conversation here, if you think about the idea that Ray Davis was some spy on the ground in Pakistan, you couldn't get a more sort of white bread American-looking guy. He wouldn't be your best clandestine operator to be in Pakistan if he was working on picking targets for drone strikes, etc. But I should say about Ray Davis that he does have a special forces background. He was 10 years in the U.S. military special forces, but he was what they call vanilla special forces. He wasn't in the black ops world. It could be that he was recruited by some black ops force within the U.S. military or intelligence, and because of his skill as an operator, managed to flip from the vanilla side to the black side of operations. But we just don't know exactly who he was. And I should say also for people watching that might not be familiar with Lashkar-e-Taiba, they're perhaps most infamous for being behind the Mumbai bombings. And in fact, at a hearing that the U.S. Senate held recently for General David Petraeus to give his update on the situation in Afghanistan, there was a great deal of discussion, particularly by Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, about Lashkar-e-Taiba, and she was saying that she believes the United States should even focus more of its attention, perhaps, than it is right now on al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So it clearly is a group that we're going to start to hear more and more about, and I think it's interesting that U.S. lawmakers seem to be focusing a lot more on Lashkar-e-Taiba than they have before, and that you had this Ray Davis thing play out and the rumors and reports that he may have been doing something with Lashkar-e-Taiba. So this is all a very delicate situation. But as one former Special Forces guy told me, an old school Special Forces guy, we're just glad that it's in the rearview mirror now. I'm not so sure it's in the rearview mirror. I think for people in Pakistan, this is going to remain in their minds and in their hearts, because I think a lot of people, and you correct me if I'm wrong, perceive it as a great miscarriage of justice for the people that were killed.
Jeremy, I wouldn't exactly agree with that. I think, as I said before, I think a lot of the hysteria that was whipped up around this case was orchestrated. It's not easy to have these kind of protests, these kind of mass rallies in Pakistan unless there's a serious amount of cash backing you.
You're talking about the protests that took place like after it was clear that happened, the mass sort of demonstrations calling for him to be hanged and stuff.
Exactly, right. So before he was set free and while he was still in jail. So I think that while of course every religious political party here has this vested interest in obviously protesting and showing that they care about this case, I think that Pakistan is generally used to a miscarriage of justice. We live in a country where people are shot every single day, people are bombed every single day. That drone strikes happen. We don't know whether civilians or militants were the actual target. So I think Pakistanis are pretty used to that. And I think that, this whole Raymond Davis case is just another example for Pakistanis to say that, oh, look, this is what Americans are like. It's reinforced a lot of the stereotypes about them. And
but that's a very sad thing to acknowledge. It's very depressing to hear.
It's reinforced the stereotype, and it's reinforced, a lot of the rumors, and may have been correct and may have not been correct about the existence of Blackwater in this country or any other contractors in this country or CIA or whatever they're doing. So it's reinforced a lot of the things that people may have not believed in before about, the Blackwater hysteria is always associated with the right wing here. And I think that's really filtered down now. So I think I don't think that the justice angle will really be the issue here. People will laugh it off and they'll forget about it in a few days. And the protests you'll see will die down as well. Because as long as there's nobody backing that, let's hang Raymond Davis concept, which, everyone says that the establishment was, this will die down soon. But the long run, again, the fact that these stereotypes have been well established, the fact that a witch hunt will be launched by any law enforcement official or intelligence operative against, any suspected spy that they see, whether they're a spy or a civilian or an NGO worker or whoever it is, these are the bigger issues at play here. And I think this only shows how important, again, I cannot stress this more, how important the role of the ISI is in deciding Pakistan's foreign policy, in deciding how Pakistan will deal with these issues. I mean, the civilian government basically looks like a fool right now because they sacked or replaced at least 3 officials, both within the leading political party as well as 2 others in the government over this case. Because they were issuing statements that did not really reflect what the intelligence community in Pakistan wanted them to say. So it really, does the US realize, I'm sure the US realizes this, but does the US public realize, and all of our viewers who are watching this, that the intelligence services, the inter-services intelligence agency is really the one the US is dealing with here? And it's not, how much of a role did the civilian government have to play? Because it was the civilian government in Lahore that arrested this man, that wanted to put him on trial, and that was trying to look for the third man who ran over the car. So that's what the civilian government was doing. They were trying to carry out justice here. But the agendas of the military and the intelligence at play, this is what the US is dealing with. And so we can talk a lot about backing democracy and the Kerry-Lugar bill and how it's supposed to strengthen democratic institutions in Pakistan. But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with the same people you were 10 years ago and 20 years ago as well.
Right, and I think, unfortunately, I don't think that many people in the United States pay attention to Pakistan. I think people have a perception of Pakistan as a place where there potentially could be loose nukes, and which is its own sort of issue, and they know that that's where they believe Osama bin Laden is hiding. But the discussion doesn't really move much beyond the parameters of that. And I think the fact that this Ray Davis case, which could have brought a lot of this up and could have resulted in a real examination of who's running Pakistan when it comes to these intelligence operations, who are the most influential forces in Pakistan, who is the ISI dealing with and double dealing with, and what is the CIA role? A lot of that was just completely swallowed up because of the horrifying situation in Japan. And so there was very minimal coverage on TV, for instance, of this Raymond Davis case. Everyone covered it, but it wasn't sort of in-depth coverage that I think you would have had Japan not been happening, had Libya not been happening. So in a way, I think the ISI and the CIA got off kind of easy in terms of the analysis game because of all these other world events. But one thing I wanted to mention, Saba, when you were talking about the kind of rumor mill in Pakistan, I know from my own reporting that my reporting has been used in Pakistan to make claims that are not true. And to exaggerate. And people have gone to the races saying Blackwater is bombing civilians in Peshawar and is behind all of these terrorist attacks. And a lot of the stuff that's been reported, and I read the Pakistani press about Blackwater, has been wildly exaggerated. It's actually something that is far more kind of insidious than just one group running around a country. But it's not the way it's being portrayed in the Pakistani media. The United States government is entirely dependent upon contractors to wage its wars, these private individuals. In Afghanistan, there are more contractors than soldiers. In Iraq, Hillary Clinton is asking for thousands and thousands of additional armed security contractors. In Pakistan, many of the individuals that work with USAID or other entities are contractors, and they're not armed contractors. But when you have this kind of a case where you do have an armed individual that is identified as a contractor and a diplomat, shoot these individuals on the streets of Lahore, it then sort of reinforces this idea that all contractors are Blackwater. And all contractors are murderous, bloodthirsty thugs that want to run around and kill people. And in that sense, I think it's going to put other diplomats, legitimate U.S. diplomats, at risk, or aid workers at risk, because of the perception that the U.S. is classifying spies that are armed and deadly as diplomats. That's a serious issue, and I think it's something that is. I'm very concerned about the safety of aid workers and other diplomats in this context, because if you're classifying spies as diplomats, which every government does around the world, and they kill people, that can get your actual diplomats in trouble or make them targets.
I completely agree, and we've seen this before. In the siege of the U.S. embassy in the 80s. When the government basically sat back. In Islamabad. And they basically sat back and they sort of spread this thing that, the US was involved in the siege of the Holy Kaaba in Saudi Arabia. That was a rumor that was spread in Islamabad, that, go attack the US embassy. And the Pakistani government did not come to the US embassy's aid while it was being attacked for hours on end, until the military sort of decided to finally step in. And until, at least one person had been killed, the embassy was basically sort of being, so what's the right word to use? It was basically being smoked into death. So that's one angle of it, and you're completely right when you say that the Blackwater angle has been misreported here. I mean, that's what I was saying before as well, that it was earlier just used as a mantle for the right wing and for militant groups to say that, we didn't do this. Militant groups here love, by the way, to blame everything on Blackwater when they don't want to take responsibility for civilian casualties. When women and children are killed, they'll say we didn't do it. They'll say Blackwater did it. And I think this was also a time for the Pakistani media to have a very serious debate on who's running the country. Is it the ISI and the military, or is it the civilian government? And the second thing they should have had a debate on is, again, what you said, how are we classifying diplomats here? And, the question of diplomatic immunity was never really resolved because of the kind of statements the civilian government made and the kind of very, very strange statements the US made. Sort of saying first he was technical administrative officer, etc., with the consulate, with the embassy, two very different things, etc., etc. So, I mean, this was a PR disaster that could have been avoided from their end, but very serious debates that I think they should have had in Pakistan just didn't happen. I mean, right now, if people think that the blood money concept is wrong, there's no basic way that you can say the US and Pakistani governments just used it to solve one of the most high-profile cases in the country. And one point that I was just thinking of today is that how is the US ever now going to ask the Pakistani government to change any of its laws for being cruel when they've used one that is, steeped in it's not a great law to execute justice in this country? Can the US then tomorrow ask the Pakistani government to help, to start maybe a campaign to repeal or to review the blasphemy laws, which are hugely controversial in Pakistan right now? The US has no leg to stand on in Pakistan right now.
Well, you've had this spate of assassinations, too, of individuals that have spoken.
Exactly. And, at that point, I mean...
like Salman Taseer and other...
And Shehbaz Bhatti, exactly.
Right.
So, if the US could have said, I mean, before the Raymond Davis case, if they could have said that, all these laws are detrimental to your country, they're basically tearing apart your society, they're being used to not just target minorities, but also to target Muslims. More Muslims are, by the way, convicted of blasphemy in Pakistan than minorities are, which is, again, hugely ironic. But the fact that, all of these debates could have happened and the US could actually have played a very positive role in sort of pressurizing the Pakistani government, or not even pressurizing it, but sort of nudging it forward and saying, we'll support you or we'll do XYZ things if you would go ahead and amend this law. But there's, all of these things, these bargaining chips that would have helped Pakistani society have gone. I mean, who is winning in this? The ISI? The army for North Waziristan? I mean, what if Pakistani civilians gotten out of the Raymond Davis case? They're the ones who have been sitting at home, sort of not wanting to go out because God knows who's running out on the news. They're the ones who are being caught in the crossfire of protests. For example, these protests have turned violent at times. There is a general sense of insecurity when there's a protest happening, and these are large-scale protests where they've, enacted mock executions, where there are flags burning. Nobody wants to go out. These are the people who, have stopped. I mean, when a protest happens, they harm Pakistani economy. Again, they also harm investment. Will foreigners want to come and work in Pakistan? They harm aid. Will aid workers want to come in Pakistan? So these, Pakistani society has lost out in this case. Really, I mean, there were so many things that the US could have done here to help create a positive, help to sort of take pressure and make this into a positive thing. But again, it's something that the US and the Pakistani governments had to decide. And you're right, this was the only way they could have resolved this case. There was no other way for them to get out.
Well, on that note, I think we can wrap this up. I will say, though, Saba, that I think that the fact that there was this massive drone strike the day after Ray Davis was released is an indication that the situation is not going to change anytime soon. And I think it's pretty clear that these covert U.S. forces are certainly there to stay in Pakistan, and it's also clear that the ISI is going to continue to play its game as sort of the power struggle continues in Pakistan and plays out. So we'll just watch and see, and we
really hope that the U.S. Embassy and Consulate can offer better driving lessons to their employees.
Amen to that. All right, Saba, it was really good to talk to you, and thank you everyone for joining us. Okay,
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.